these chapters. We're in chapter 6, beginning at verse 8. Does that sound correct? And just to kind of set the stage, we've been looking at these and we kind of determined, for the recording's sake, and for those, and for Susan who's with us tonight, thank you for joining us, that God kind of created the tabernacle almost as this food truck. God wants people to come to Him, come out of the wilderness, experience His love, and be both physically and spiritually. And last week we finished the 5 offerings and we talked about how this is kind of a menu that God has provided for us to encounter Him and to be fed by Him. And you want to ask that her? I don't mind making charts. I don't really want to do a lot of them, but I don't like this one that we really needed to have. And for those of you online, if you ask me, I'll make sure to send you a digital copy of it. And so we just kind of talked about how, especially last week, I felt like I got it. For those of you who were concerned, I got a little preachy, but I thought it was really good to see the connection between just coming out of Easter, the crucifixion and the resurrection, and looking at these sacrifices, and putting that right alongside the notion of the life groups and covenant discipleship, seeing how God is trying to create a different way of being. And so for the rest of Leviticus, that's what we're going to talk about, is what does this different way of being look like? And how does it work? So while this is not necessarily all going to be about offerings and sacrifices, so some of it will be, much of the next couple of weeks is going to be about how do we do this differently? Does that make sense? Up to this point, as we've been looking at the sacrifices, it says very clearly about the people bringing their offerings, what their role is. Here's where it really starts to shift to where those of us in leadership, how we're meant to come alongside those who are bringing them. Does that make sense? And so, Susan, and for you and for everybody, just a reminder, what I do is I read a paragraph at a time, and we will do our best to answer any question that we come across and let the Holy Spirit speak. So, with that in mind, I'm currently, what is this? Currently reading out of the English Standard Version, and of course we encourage a lot of different translations because English is a difficult language, and so we like to see what translators do to kind of help us understand the Hebrew. So with that, I'm going to read my first paragraph is 8 through 13. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. Burnt offering shall be on the heart of the altar all night until the morning. And the fire of the altar shall be kept burning on it. And the priest shall put on his linen garments, and put on his linen undergarments on his body. And he shall take up the ashes to which the fire has reduced the burnt offering on the altar, and put them beside it. Then he shall take off his garments, and put on other garments, and carry the ashes outside the camp to a clean place. The fire on the altar shall be kept burning on it. It shall not go out. The priest shall burn wood on it every morning, and he shall arrange the burnt offering on it, and shall burn it on it the fat of the peace offering. The fire shall be kept burning on the altar continually. It shall not burn."
Okay, so because they have to get in their garb, I could just bring a sacrifice as a drop.
Well, you should be able to. In fact, notice it says the fire is to be burning all the time. So there should always be priests there to attend. Whether it's in the middle of the night, first thing in the morning, in the afternoon, twilight, anytime you can bring it on. What it is saying is that every morning they are to clean up out the ash from the altar I'm assuming in anticipation of the day's offerings. And then those ashes are to be taken outside of the camp. What else do you notice, or what questions does it ask? All I can think of is really the light. You know, it's burning all the time.
What kind of wood? It was softwood, but it was kind of green, but it was softwood.
Well, I mean, I brought in that lab application. I don't know, I'm sure there's lots of different kinds.
But we're not talking a place that's got a lot of.
This is wilderness, not Sahara Desert. Sahara Desert, sand dunes, nowhere.
Even wilderness would be, I mean, really popular, would it be?
Okay.
Or we find out in the under report actions.
We'll take lots of pictures. But I want to be cautious. Because this moment in human history, this is 3,500 years ago. We actually don't know. I mean, realistically, we can only guess at what the climate and the temperature and the terra formation around it is like. Now, understand, this is the southern part of what is known as the promised land, you know, the land flowing with milk and honey, this place where God provides everything. And so at one point, I would have to say that it was probably nicer than what it is now. For those of you who are reading the Bible in a year, today's readings, I never can get over whenever you read that they went in, they defeated the enemy, and then they salted the earth and they beat it with rocks to destroy all plants. They wanted the place dead and gone and never to be rebuilt. Well, it's kind of that way then. You know, not a whole lot of people can live in the wilderness as it is today. It's a very small group of people who live in it. So there's a part of me that wants to believe that at this point in time in human history, it might have been much more like around here. Now, we don't know. We don't know for sure. But we also know by, in northern Canaan Valley, and you know, the Phoenicians are known for their cypress. Wonderful big, you know, groves of cypress of Lebanon, and it's you know, it causes me to think of pictures like the redwood forest out in California, because they send lots and lots and lots of wood to Israel. And if they're sending it to Israel, they're probably exporting it to all kinds of other places too. And you're talking about an area about the size of Rhode Island. So my assumption is that this area is not the wilderness that we see today. Does that make sense? Also going from my assumption that while I believe everything that scientists say happened, my timeline is a little different based on what I read. And so if you're talking about that it's, what do we say, we're about 1,500 years post the flood at this point, then they're still really warming up from what was probably the ice age that came from after. So if you push the ice caps down to where we know they were here in the United States, it's fair that they were in the same place in Europe and in Asia. And so that pushes the temperate zone further. I watched a study, this is probably the end of last year. They talked about, they found evidence that underneath the Sahara Desert at one point in time, it was a temperate forest. And they claim it was about 8 to 10 or 12,000 years ago, it was a temperate forest with big major lakes and lots of fresh water. Now, I don't know what that actually does, but that shows that this is probably not the wilderness we think of. Does that make sense?
Well, here, it would take a lot of wood to keep.
Well, and that's why I was asking, if it was softwood, I have to keep, if it's a harder wood, then, it wouldn't take as much wood over a day.
So to
And
that,
it's tighter, you know.
to that, I want to add a reality. All of this wood in chapter or verse 12, it tells us is basically being soaked in the fat of the other sacrifices. So that would cause the wood to continue to burn longer and not to be used up as. That's a nice little.
But that also tells you the softer wood because it's that way.
Yeah.
Where you take a harder, like what we consider oak or maple, it's not going to soak that up. So it's got to be a softer, open porous to take that oil in. That answers my question. That's part of the point here. Somebody had to be up all night just cooking the fire.
Well, and I know once we get into the promised land, like in Joshua and Judges, it talks about them taking a whole group of people and making them woodcutters to constantly build for the building projects and fire. So on the one hand, the people of Israel are probably functioning a lot like a lawnmower. They're just cleaning the place out as they go. All of the scrub brush and dead stuff and anything else that they can get to burn, they're going to be taken.
My name is German, you sure about good, he's a cutter. Literally, that's what we. Oh, yeah, that's some people that were charging, sure there's some around.
That's better than my mom's maiden name is German, and that's Huxel. So you know. But I just, when I read that part about the fat of the peace offering, so you got the whole burnt offering, it's talking about that, but it's augmenting that by saying, on the same altar, we're burning these other offerings, and one of those is the peace offering, all the fat of the peace offering gets burned. Well, what do you know about a charcoal fire with grease dripping down? You don't have to use as much charcoal because it's going to keep things going. So I don't know if it's soft or hardwood.
That makes sense. With the patent stuff on it, that's going to burn basically looking over slow.
The wood wouldn't need to burn so fast. So on the one hand, there is the spiritual reality where the people of the land thought by consuming fat that they would take the bountiful life of the animal that they would eat. And the fat animals generally pretty healthy, right? So by eating the fat, that was a way of taking in that health. God saying, rely on me for your. But there's the added benefit of you don't have to have as much wood because you're burning the fat. But anything else you notice in this paragraph?
It said carry a outside of the camp to a place that is ceremonially clean.
Okay. So what's your question?
So they didn't have plans for reaction, what was to be done with that. It's not like just want to be at the camp and pile it up.
There was definitely a place that was the latrine, and there's definitely a separate place that was for the ash, and there's definitely another separate place for those people who are quarantined. You know, at least 3 different areas outside. We haven't got to the quarantine. Well, we get to quarantine, Exodus, I don't remember. Just very briefly. We'll get to it in depth in Leviticus. Now, the other side of that is if they're moderately smart, as we know today, as we're getting rid of the garden running out here, if they would spread that ash around, it would actually make all of the ground around it more healthy. So imagine that God would have a sacrificial system where it not only meets the people's spiritual needs, and it meets their physical needs for nourishment. Oh, and by the way, it's good for the environment too.
What was ash unclean?
No, ash is clean. Because any uncleanness is burnt away completely. And it was taken from the altar, which was ceremonially clean. And that's why they only removed the ash once a day. To make sure that they knew what they were doing. You know, and if there's, my assumption is that there's stuff that wasn't completely burned up, it got put over on the side where the fire's at. We pull the rest of the ash out and then we're out. But that's my assumption after a lot of years of standing at a grill. Especially charcoal grills where you underfed the charcoal, so you got to put more on later. What else do you notice, or any other questions that this makes you ask?
When it says that the fire has to continue to burn, it doesn't say that a big fire has to continue. It could be like, if you have a fire, like we had a wood stove in Maine, and there'd be ashes in the morning when we put more wood on it. So it could just be a small portion that's still burning.
Yes, and remember, the altar that they're using right now is essentially an 8-foot by 8-foot barbecue pit. So you'd only need to keep, a couple of foot square section that's got some hot coals on it. The rest of it could be completely cleaned out. And you throw some wood on there, get it relit, and spread it out as the day goes on. They wouldn't necessarily have to use the whole thing all the time. It depends on the offerings that are being brought. But yeah, you're right. Realistically, they don't have to keep much of it. Just like the lamps inside the tabernacle, they have oil in them, but a cup of oil like this with a wick, that can burn a long time for just a cup of oil. Same thing that we're talking about with the fat here, that can cause it to burn a long time. Pragmatically, we think of it's going to need a lot of wood, but I don't think it needs nearly as much wood as we would assume it does.
Well, the last sentence, the fire must get burning or finished, it does not go out. So, I mean, somebody's going to have to keep wood to at least keep flame going, not that it has to be huge, but still it's because a piece of wood is not going to make it. You know, I didn't know that, you got to get it warmed up for it continues to burn, get back to the fire. The wood doesn't actually burn to make it fall.
As I 3 former firemen and 2 former marshals would let us know, there's a whole process to this.
All right, that's what.
No, but that's important to know. So in some ways, and I don't remember if in Exodus it told us that some of the Levites would have been in charge of it. When the tabernacle is not being moved around, they would have other duties. So I'm certain that there's probably, Grant's not here, but if Grant was here, he would definitely want to be a part of the family that's in charge of the fire. He's a fireman.
You think there was sacrifices going on every day?
Well, there was mandatory sacrifices every day. And then there was the sacrifice that people brought. And now that I say that, I think about what you talked about last couple of weeks. There's probably gonna have the mandatory sacrifices, because then it made it easier for everybody else to come and bring theirs and admit that they have done something wrong. So there's already a sacrifice going. I don't know if it's a mandatory sacrifice or somebody else has brought it, but and we'll just keep it going. We are able to confess and get this out of us and keep moving forward. I mean, I'm sure that there's probably those days when it's a really low day. And, they're only keeping just a little bit of the fire going, and they're only doing a little bit beyond the mandatory sacrifices. But remember, we're also talking about my estimate of 3.6 million people. So even if everybody only messes up once a month, and there's still some sinning going on. So probably a slow day is a slow day at McDonald's. The drive-thru still seems to be backed up. Any other thoughts?
Yes, so the priest has to put on the undergarments, and he changes clothes when he takes the ashes out.
So they're priestly garments. So you have the high priestly garments, and then they have the linen garments that all priests wear. When they are tending to the fire, when they are tending to the ash, they have to wear the priestly garments. When they come out of the tabernacle, when they're no longer functioning as priests in the tabernacle, they wear regular clothes to then take the ashes out. Because you don't want to take the priestly garments and wear them out into the wilderness where you're done with ash, and then something happened and you get your priestly garments all nasty. What do you do?
When is the price of the ones that you take the ashes out?
Well, that's a good question. In theory, I guess they probably could have trusted anybody to do it. And then, as I said that, my immediate thought was, those who function as priests should not think of their work so highly that they can't do the everyday tasks too. And so I think that my immediate gut reaction is that they shouldn't just be in the tabernacle, only doing the holy stuff, and all of a sudden begin to think of themselves as better than everybody else. But that's the gospel according to Saint
Okay,
Go for it.
do they have to serve consecutive days?
I don't know.
In other words, if they rotate every other day, or?
Well, I'm assuming that they did rotate. Now, in the early days, when it's just Aaron and his two sons, because he had the two that got themselves killed because they didn't do it right, and then his grandsons, the Levites were there and they would rotate, but someone had to always be their function. And so my assumption is that they, like everyone else, would take a Sabbath. But not all priests would get the Sabbath off, because again, there's daily sacrifice that have to be done every day. And there will be people who bringing a sacrifice on the Sabbath is a legitimate thing to do. So I don't know what their rotation looked like. I know in the New Testament, we have the story of Zechariah, or his wife Elizabeth conceives John the Baptist. His name is drawn, and it's his turn to serve. It doesn't tell how long he served. It doesn't.
This translation says that for his order was on duty that night.
So, okay, there you go. So then they would probably serve at a week at a time, and then you did. And by the time of Christ anyway, they were serving a week at a time, and then they might not serve again the whole year.
So, okay, do they mean a week as in 7 days, because then they would be Sabbath? Right?
Fair point.
They may be off for
year or a month.
He's part of the order, so there would be more than him serving that week.
That would be the assumption, yeah. That their rotation was on that. It's probably.
Like your day might be Friday, Tuesday, maybe Saturday.
Right. And, you know, let's say there's 7 in the rotation, and every one of us gets a different Sabbath for that week, and then once our rotation's off, then we're off. Now, in the early days, at this point, there aren't as many priests, but that's why the Levites are there to help them too. And so my assumption is just like we have in that story, where there's a rotation, the Levites would serve because you know, I'm jumping ahead, and Jim Burke's not here today. We don't know how much they want. I just want to make that point. There's a part of me that thinks that I can see God saying, you're going to sit in the corner and stay there for a while. And then 39 years later, he finally lets them do that. There's a part of me that can see that kind of, but then there's that unholy part of me as a parent that gets really frustrated with the kids again. That's happening. So we don't know how often they move. Now, when I was a kid, I thought they wandered in the desert. So they were here 3 or 4 days, and then there 3 or 4 days. And in that case, the Levites are packing the tabernacle up, packing it up, and unpacking it. There's hardly any time off. But my assumption is, now that I've been reading, they probably stayed places a little longer than that, and then they probably rotated and helped with their Spain.
Okay, so you say the Levites were the set.
Correct.
So the Levites could do that?
Yes. Now, only Aaron's family was allowed to be high priest. Okay. But remember, Aaron's family gives the example of the high priest for the Levites. The Levites gave the example of what it means to be a priest for the people of Israel. And the people of Israel were meant to be priests to all the world. So by extension, in theory, when we read, like we've been reading in Samuel and Kings the last couple of weeks, where you see odd people from odd tribes serving as priests, I think it's okay because of that reality. God called them to be a nation of priests. Which is again why we had that conversation, why you have a plaque in front of your spot up about being a bishop of technology, right? I mean, these tasks, these roles within the body have specific meanings and specific purposes, but it's not to be greater than everyone else. It's actually to be a servant through that role.
And any of them could serve in that role, technically.
Technically, with the exception of the high priest, which was supposed to be Aaron's family. As far as we know. Seems pretty clear there are a lot of high priests who weren't from Aaron's family. But anyway, who pays attention to the rules, right? Any other thoughts? Got a lot out of these 5 verses. Next paragraph is 14 through 23. Let's see how much we get out of this. And this is the law of the grain offering. The sons of Aaron shall offer it before the Lord in front of the altar. And one shall take it from it a handful of the fine flour of the grain offering, and its oil, and all the frankincense that is on the grain offering, and burn this as its memorial portion on the altar, pleasing aroma to the Lord. And the rest of it Aaron and his sons shall eat. It shall be eaten unleavened in the holy place, in the court of the tent of meeting they shall eat. It shall not be baked with leaven. I have given it as their portion of my food offerings. It is a thing most holy, like the sin offering and the guilt offering. Every male among the children, Aaron may eat it, as decreed forever throughout their generations. From the Lord's offering, whatever touches them shall become holy. What do you think? What do you notice? What questions?
Did the women go hungry?
I was wondering that, because as I was reading along, I was thinking, we discussed how with the sacrifices, the whole family came. Now, there were parts that the men were representing. So I guess if the women came, they would come like any other participant. But for this particular part, I guess it's only for those who are serving. And that was only the men. For the record, I'm glad that they burn all of the frankincense because I really don't want to eat bread flavored with frankincense. That just does not sound real great. Anything else you notice or any other questions you find yourself asking? Notice, priest on duty only gets to eat unleavened bread. You all as regular people, you can go have your fluffy white bread and bake with yeast and stuff like that. If I'm on duty, apparently I only get the unleavened. Yeah, nothing wrong with that if it's like, well, Melissa made it come to me here.
You should come get the burpees.
It's very true. Anything else? What do you do with that last line I read? Whatever touches them shall become holy. Anybody else just read something different than that? Now I'm wanting to. I'm looking at, this is still chapter 6, right? See what the Hebrew is, and that's verse 18.
No.
Let's see. This is where that spot where I wish I knew how to diagram sentences so I could figure out what it's actually, what's referring to what. I didn't learn that. I wish I had.
So what's the distinction if it becomes holy? You have to put it on a shelf and it can never be used again, or?
No, holy at its base meaning means other than.
No, mine says, Lord, made by fire, everyone that touches them shall be holy.
And I think the implication of this is that when you give a grain offering, that offering, by the fact that part of it is placed on the altar, is given to the Lord, everything that touches that grain offering is made holy. That you, by the simple act of bringing the offering, that's what makes you holy. That's what makes you right with God. It's not how much you give, it's not, there's no distinguishing between, oh, this is a bigger event, so we better do something more. And there's a reality that everyone who's serving in the tabernacle, who eats of this, is made holy. And so I'm guessing, my guess is that God is saying that because you have brought, just simply because you have brought, and everyone else who's involved, you all are made right.
That's just the point of acknowledgement.
That's why I think, when we get to the comments, they're gonna say, the sacrifice I really want is a contrite heart, a broken spirit, somebody who understands they've done wrong. That's what God really wants. It's not necessarily about the offering. The offering is the vehicle by which we are acknowledging, I'm broken, I messed up, and God, you gotta fix it. And so that would be my guess. That this is implying that it is those who have touched it, those who gave it, those who offered it, those who eat it, everyone who's been involved is made holy. And that holiness doesn't necessarily mean better, but in a way it is. It means set apart. It means other than. God is holy because God is not like us. Does that make sense? And I'm trying to think of how to describe this. I think I've used this story before, about my dad when I was in high school, him showing his strength and what he was doing. And I told you guys a story. My dad goes to house school with me, and he's pretty leathery, so you might be able to tell that. That's because he spent days out in the sun. But in between my junior and senior year, I was working with Dad, and we had blocked up this basement. He was putting the floor joists on so we could build the rest of the house. And we were trying to get all the floor joists up, and that was going to be the end of the day, whenever that got done. And he was at the last spot, and he was in the corner, and he was on his ladder, and I was lifting stuff up to him, and he was nailing in place. He could not get to nail this. So he reached out and swung himself out, and almost the iron cross fashion, held himself with one arm dangling in the air while he hammered in the last couple of nails. In that moment, I knew my physical prowess was never going to take my hands. There was a sense in that moment that he was wholly other than me. You get what I'm saying? That even though at that point I was probably as close to my peak physical ability that I'd ever been, he was just other. You get that? That is kind of the notion of what holiness means. It's similar, it's related, but it's completely other. That makes sense? And so what God is saying is by us participating in this offering, everyone who's involved becomes holy as he is holy. Now, maybe not to the same extent that God is holy, but as much as a human being can be in that moment, because you've done this act, you've come with a contrite heart, you've brought the sacrifice, you've participated in the offering, you're made holy. To the best of my ability, Susan? That's
I
what you
concur.
concur. Okay.
I don't think it means that they are.
Oh.
In the practice of.
We know very shortly after they leave the tabernacle, it probably won't take long before that holiness seems to wear off and they've done something stupid. Now, and if that was the case, there's almost, I have this picture of a far side comic, I just left the tabernacle, oh, it's time to get back in line, I'm messed up. Hope it's not that. See, hope it lasts a little longer. Any other thoughts? Next paragraph. 19 through 23. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "This is the offering that Aaron and his sons shall offer to the Lord on the day when he is anointed. A tenth of an ephah of fine flour as a regular grain offering. Half of it in the morning and half in the evening. It shall be made with oil on a griddle. You shall bring it well mixed in baked pieces like a grain offering, and offer it for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The priest from among Aaron's sons, who is anointed to succeed him, shall offer it to the Lord as decreed forever. The whole of it shall be burned. Every grain offering of a priest shall be wholly burned. It shall not be eaten."
Yeah, it smells good, but you need.
Right. And I think the reality of that is because essentially everything Aaron's family is given counts from the rest of the flock. They're either paid for their work, they're given the flour for their work. And so the reality is, God says, anything that they give as their offering is meant to go wholly and completely to God. I had this picture as I was reading it, of a bunch of people bringing eating bowls of dough ready to be baked, and then I realized, oh no, this is baked.
So you throw out more.
Okay, so you bring that up. I want to ask a question. What makes you make that statement? I think I know where you're going with this statement, but I'm just trying.
Well, I said it now, I'm kind of thinking that maybe I don't think it's good.
Well, what were you thinking?
Because God wouldn't, if it isn't good enough to be eaten by the humans, then why would it be okay for God's creatures to eat?
So that's not where I thought you were going.
So I kind of realized you get words right at the yard, top on the other, eat.
So you're going very different direction. I'll just be honest. When I first started in the ministry, one of the things I was told is after communion, once you serve communion, that whatever is left, you're supposed to give to the elements. That whatever is partaken of either should be consumed or given away. And in most Catholic churches in particular, they have a sink that doesn't go into the drain, it goes straight down to dirt. And the communion line has to be got rid of in that sink. And the bread that is left is meant to be tossed out. The birds can eat it, but if it's not consumed. And part of that notion comes back to this kind of an idea. You don't throw out what is given to God. You either consume it, it is either eaten, or it's all burned up. It is completely used for that purpose. We don't just throw our leftovers. Now, not everybody does it that way. I've never been a stickler about it, but my communion stewards clean up afterwards. Now, when my kids were younger, and if you had Hawaiian bread, it was not going to get thrown away. In fact, at our church in Huntington County, over Mount Etna, the kids would flock to get to be the ones that if there was any little cups left, those were going to be drank, and if there was any bread left, they were going to eat it. It was not going to be tossed. Just had to wash everything after the kids' time. Little promise. But I think that's the point that it's saying is all of this is meant to be consumed. This is given over to God. It's meant to be used for holy purposes. And so it's either consumed by the worshiping body or if it's an offering by the priest, it is completely consumed on the altar. Because to give it back to the people is almost I don't know how to put it. You're here on the road. You got an idea of what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's been presented to God. And the only people or the only things that can consume it is nature. It really is, and God's a good recycler.
Yeah.
He knows how to protect the environment that he created, and if it's, like, I always do the bread out for the birds. And then either somebody drank it, the grape juice, or I would pour it down and drink. Sometimes I would have them take the grape juice out and pour it on the ground, but
So I think in this instance, and you brought up the point, it's fully burnt up, and then therefore it's turned into ash, and therefore it feeds the ground, which grows the grain, which gets brought as an offering, which part of it gets given to the priest, and then the priest gave it as an offering, and then it's burned up. So, we got it. Dawn, I guess I am a stickler about it once it's consecrated. I've just chosen not to fight it back. If I don't know what they're doing with it once the meeting is over, I just, that's not something, I never wanted to upset a communion street, because if they're willing to do the work and put it out and provide it, and clean the mess, I'm not gonna ask the question.
So if you walk in and like, it's kind of, you get
Well, here, we cut it in, they cut it into little,
at least a little thing.
they cut it into little bitty squares, so good luck, Dan. on fruit time.
We make it in something.
Yeah, we can improve on. See, that's what I'm trying.
Making it like, what, right, pressing,
I'll make it in seven.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk again, that's.
good.
Yeah.
Again, I want to accentuate the reality. We trying to only think of the bloody side of the sacrifice, not the greater reality that God is really trying to teach them better ecology, how to care for the world around them. He's trying to teach them how hospitality and how when we bring stuff, we should be willing to share it with those who are around us. He's teaching them how to live in a better community. I mean, this is not just a single thing. And in some ways, I feel like when we offer our offerings on Sunday morning, it's lost a lot of all those extra things that come with it. Do you get what I'm saying? I've never experienced it, but I've been told that the offering is the highlight of the worship service in most of Africa. It's the highlight of the service, the higher point, more than the sermon, more than the communion, more than the singing, and they love to sing over there. More than anything else, the offering, because people are joyfully and gladly giving. Rarely is it money. Rarely is it money, though sometimes it is. More often than not, it's what they, that, you know, if they make textiles, they're bringing clothes. If they are farmers, they're bringing grain. If they're herdsmen, they're bringing animals. They are giving what they have, and it is a joy for them to give.
Isn't that interesting that by nature, you're happier when you give versus receive, and that's how we're made.
It's how we are designed to get. And yet, I was going to say the American culture. I'll say the Western culture. I won't just, limit to us. We have become incredibly self-centered, self-focused, self-indulgent. And then I can't help but wonder why we're so depressed. It's all about me all the time. It gets harder to please me. Stuff loses its value. So yeah, we were designed to actually be other focused, to care for others. And even in the sacrificial system, it's not just about me. My sacrifice, my offering is meant for the health of the body. And it encourages the rest of the body to admit their wounds and to offer their sacrifices. And everybody is spiritually fed and physically. Well, Don, I may ask you for your training then, but while Dan Butcher is doing it, I'm leaving it alone. And so whenever he says he's hanging it up and we gotta have new ones, then I'll, I guess now you guys are holding, so we gotta do some training. So send me your training, Don. Any other thoughts? Last paragraph of chapter 6. 24 through 30. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the sin offering. In the place where the burnt offering is killed, shall the sin offering be killed before the Lord. It is most holy. The priest who offers it for sin shall eat it. In the holy place it shall be eaten. In the court of the tent of meeting. Whoever touches its flesh shall be holy, and when any of its blood is splashed on a garment, you shall wash that on which it was splashed in a holy place. And the earthenware vessel in which it is boiled shall be broken. But if it is boiled in a bronze vessel, that shall be scoured and rinsed in water. Every male among the priests may eat of it, it is most holy. But no sin offering shall be eaten from which any blood is brought into the tent of meeting to make atonement in the holy place. It shall be burned up with fire. What's your thinking?
The distinction of cookware.
The distinction of cookware. Okay. That's the question.
Well, I have notes in mind. The one says ordinary kitchen utensils and domestic ware made of clay, usually iron, and furniture. So they wanted a bronze pot.
You could use a standard ceramic clay pot. But once it was used for that purpose, with meat and blood in it, or being cooked with raw meat in it, it was no longer good. Because clay is porous and it would pull whatever's in there, and it's, I don't know if they had the way that we know how to sterilize. But on the other hand, the way they could sterilize it is to burn the thing, and if you burn the thing, well, it'll probably shatter anyway, because it's clay. Whereas the copper pot can be scoured, and a bronze. The bronze pot can be scoured and made sterile. Which causes me to realize that when we just read a couple weeks ago about Solomon building the temple, all of those implements were bronze that were used for, and of course we had that discussion when we talked about the thing made in the first place. So there's a reality of contamination. So if you are not wealthy enough to have your own bronze cooking utensil to come and cook, boil your sacrifice, if you don't want the grilled meat, you can have the boiled meat, but you gotta have you gotta got the bronze and you're good. You can take it home and clean it. If you only got the clay, you're giving that a bit of your own.
Those need to be made.
My assumption is, yeah, I mean, realistically, I could go out in my garden right now and probably harvest enough clay to make me a nice, good sized pot. It takes time. It's not a fast process, but it can easily be done.
I don't know, Jane put a lot together, couldn't she?
Yeah, she put that pot together. Now, she didn't have to harvest the clay to make the pot, but she made the pot within 25 minutes or so of the sermon. Yeah. course, then it was also, you had to take it home and fire it, paint it, and then blaze it, and fire it again. There's more steps still. What else do you notice?
So all this eating that the priest does, why isn't he on 400?
Not about protein.
In some ways, it's all protein. He keeps going back to that stupid carnivore diet. All he eats is dairy and meat and fat. He'll drop 20 pounds pretty quick. Of course, he goes back to eating little Debbie treats.
Little Debbie's are nutritious.
What?
Not great nutritious, but there is nutritional value.
Parents said,
The other side of it is understand what the priest ate was a representative portion. And even if it's not a demanding benefit, it's all the other workers in the tabernacle that day would be allowed to eat out of that portion. So I'm going to use us as an example. Sunday we had 254 people. Crazy Sunday. Really great, but crazy. You had at least 3 of you back in the sound room. We had 2 ushers and 2 greeters, so that's 7. We had 2 people back in the nursery, so that's 9. We had a liturgist, that's 10. We got all of the musicians and the praise team. So you add on another 10 there, that's 20 people.
wait, you mean we should have had a meal about this?
I told you guys, how many months?
Food, nobody can do.
That everything, something. But so there you go, you got to partake. But you start looking at who all is involved in the service. Even the woodcutters that we talked about earlier would have been considered priests, Levites, doing the work of the temple, and then therefore, so long as they were wearing their priest garb when they went inside the tabernacle, then they could eat, because they were doing the work. And it's probably like any other restaurant. You aren't taking your lunch break when everybody's along. You rotate it. If you have to, take breaks. And so they would sit down and they would eat with the people who were eating, worshiping. Does that help? By the same token, the priests probably aren't ordering the big plate menu. They're getting the little finger sandwich and eating and going back. I've said for years, I've always thought of a diner as a great base for a church plant, and now I'm seeing where, essentially you've got this picture of everybody who's in the front half of the tabernacle. They're eating, they're fellowshipping together, they're celebrating people who are letting go of their sins. This is a big deal. It's a joyous, even though some people are coming in the midst of their sorrow, or the grief of their sin. But then, as Daniel says, if you go back along the sides of the inner tent, the holy place, that those are the areas where people would be once they're done eating, they go back there and worship, go back there and praying, and so. The people who have the time, then once they're done eating, after they've offered the sacrifice, then they go worship. And so there's always this notion of probably singing and dancing going on, people praying and reaching out to God, and also everybody who's eating and sacrificing. And it's not what I tend to think of when I think of the Christian cathedral.
How do they schedule somebody to come in and do that? What I mean is to bring it off.
Well, I don't think you would schedule. You just come.
You might be there for days.
You could, but if you're there for days, then you're also eating off of everybody else's sacrifice. So it's not like you got to worry. Everybody brings a picnic lunch with their lamb. And you're eating your picnic lunch with everybody else's plan. I also think that, I mean, an 8x8 grill is a pretty big grill. That's, you could throw at least 2 full cows on an 8x8 grill. And probably about 4 sheep, if you really had to. So, my gut is that even if the system was working the way it was absolutely intended, everybody was participating the way they should, I get the impression that people probably weren't, there probably wasn't a backlog. Does that make sense? And my gut also tells me that because we're human and we don't do things the way God tells us to do, there probably wasn't as many people offering sacrifices as should, and therefore there's probably even less of a backlog. The hope is that they did, but the reality is the problem. And of course, by the time you get to the book of Samuel, where Samuel's in the tabernacle and Levi and his sons are serving, you don't even hardly hear them talking about a sacrifice at all. They're functioning more like a Catholic priest at confession than they are doing offerings, which is, again, another sacrifice.
You're still looking at 3 million people. I can't imagine there's not a line forever.
But then again, it could go all day and all night. But let's just be honest. You're in the middle of nowhere. What else you got to do? So you got to take in line to bring it up.
They didn't do that, we, like, you know, the children, they show some village scene, and kind of that marketplace style. We don't have that in America, you know, that's supermarkets and whatnot.
Yeah, the grocery store and Walmart are about as close as we get to that, and you don't see people just kind of hanging out talking to each other. And you might talk to each other as you're passing each other at the end of the aisle and say, hey.
I don't know, sometimes middle aisle,
Well,
here's the one.
For the record, when I go to Walmart, I am a hunter. I have my list, I go hunting, I get it, I leave. I allow the people who are standing in the middle of the aisle to do their thing, just as long as I can get to what I need. Excuse me, can I get this? You can go back to talking, I just need to get this, and then I go on. I am furious.
And if I start looking at it, what's the other way?
No, I don't intentionally avoid it. We have been known to get stopped and talk in Walmart. My wife is, that's why I'm a hunter here, because I don't have time to be a gatherer with all the other stopping and helping.
If you're gathering, you're ignoring everybody else, and then you're in your own little world.
You're not under
You have to purpose.
Well,
Everybody else, I'm doing my thing.
she knows more than I do, and when we go, we often do get caught. Yes,
But I walk right before them.
there are times, yes. Any other thoughts? Next, we're moving to chapter 7. Just gonna keep going, but we can do this paragraph. Any other thoughts before we move into chapter 7?
I'm so amazed. They do this on a grill, right? How long it takes for it to burn? But, I'm thinking of doing something on the 7th. In burning it up in those sections. Okay.
So
That is okay.
if you go back and remember, look at our, if you got your chart, the OLA, the first one is the whole burn off. And remember, you know, the whole burnt offering was when they were seeking God's guidance. So in theory, you might have a couple of these every day, but you're probably not going to have very many on any given. Most of the offerings that are being offered are not whole burnt offerings. Most of them are going to be the other four offerings. The hope is also that most of them are going to be the minha, the tribute, the first fruits, the grain offering, food offering, praise to God. The hope is that that's where most of the offerings come. And that's stuff that's going to be eaten. You know, yes, it's clean, yes, it's quartered, it's not, you know, we're not putting it on a spit and roasting it whole. You know, when we were in Mount Etna, was it in Mount Etna the first time I tried the whole turkey, grilled turkey? I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
I saw a way that you could do a boneless turkey and grill it, and the whole thing cooks in 30 minutes.
That eating.
Yes. Completely edible, the whole thing. I watched this guy debone the turkey and ended up laying it flat on the grill, and I tried it. And it was cooked, thoroughly cooked all the way through, ready to be eaten.
As you drive.
No? Oh,
And many times,
no. I don't have the first name certification, I'm sorry. And I did, back then, I definitely did not have a meat thermometer. Because I was poor. That was one. But I started that to say, I don't think it takes as long as what we think of to cook things. Really is a grill. This is probably high heat, you're searing it. These are meats that don't have to be cooked to shoe leather. To be, I mean, think about the meats we're talking about. Beef and mutton and cheddar, goat, sheep, cow. And so all the blood is drained out, so you're not worried about that part. It's being quartered, they've said that many times, right? And it's being cooked on the grill at a pretty high searing heat. So yes, it's going to take some time, but probably not as long. I'd say in theory, if you were just coming to offer your sacrifice and eat your portion and leave, and you're one of those people who's the last into church and the first one out, you could probably get the whole thing done in an hour and a half. If there's no way to one. It also depends on how many checkout Levites you got to. More comments on this? Anything else?
Did he debone everything? And that's what I'm thinking, because, you know, don't stay longer. I mean, you eat the meat. It's a lot less than if there's bone.
It really doesn't say.
I know, and that's what's over my mind, is, you know, it's for it to be completely burned, like, I said,
The whole burnt offering would have probably been on the altar all day.
yeah, so, it is okay, while.
But then again, we're talking about an 8x8, so probably only one section each day is being used for the whole burnt offering. The rest of it is indirect heat, where smoke and meat flow and stuff.
so the complete burn, if that's your sacrifice, we have to wait around those things.
No,
Okay.
not necessarily, I mean, no, because you come and you offer your sacrifice, and then if you're entreating God, then you go back to the section, pray. And the priests take care of cooking the meat, cooking it down. If you're the other ones where it's a part of people eating, if it's the shelving, the peace offering, then the people who you have got to be at peace with, they get to offer it, and you will probably go and pray while your meat's cooking, and then come back and be part of it. I would guess that this is far more participatory than everybody standing around looking at the chef's cooking food. This isn't a hibachi grill. This is.
The one thing, so we're gonna be ready.
My life, I can get drawn to the burn every day. Maybe people you're in gym, where you
Back in all of your
That's,
curiosity as much as we can know.
well, that helps me with the burn offering, is it's gotta have to be hot fire.
Yeah.
Know that 8 by 8, that has to be hot fire, and then the rest of it, like you said, radiates out, or it's a more of a cooking temperature. Okay, that makes sense,
And I would guess too, you know, that your question about the Sabbath and things like that, they probably rotate which quarter of the altar is being used for that on any given week. Because again, you know, as Susan said, God is about sustainability. He doesn't want to use things up. He says all along, I want things to last. And therefore I want you to last. And I want this system to not deplete your flocks and herds. In theory, it shouldn't be as big of a deal as we're afraid it might. Yes, there are days where there's lots and lots of animals being sacrificed. But again, God's not about trying to just take out all of your flocks and herds so that you got nothing left. In theory, as many likes to point out, we should be embracing this, and it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Shouldn't have to do this very often, but you know, there's probably those people who, as soon as they think back, just need to get back in line. Any other thoughts? Next paragraph is 7:1. Through 10 verses. Okay. This is the law of the guilt offering. It is most holy. In the place where they kill the burnt offering, they shall kill the guilt offering. And its blood shall be thrown against the sides of the altar. And all its fat shall be offered, the fat of the tail, the fat that covers the entrails, the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them at the loins, and the one lobe of the liver, he shall remove with the kidneys. The priest shall burn them on the altar as a food offering to the Lord. It is a guilt offering. Every male among the priests may eat of it. It shall be eaten in a holy place, the most holy. The guilt offering is just like the sin offering. There is one law for it. The priest who makes atonement with it shall have it. And the priest who offers any man's burnt offering shall have for himself the skin of the burnt offering that he has offered. And every grain offering baked in the oven, and all that is prepared on a pan or in griddles shall belong to the priest who offers it. And every grain offering mixed with oil or dry shall be shared equally among all the sons of Aaron.
Why was that?
We had this discussion before, remember? I was here. Was that what you wasn't here? I think that everything was being cooked right there, and it says very clearly that what they don't burn up, what they don't cook, is taken out to that place set up the side. Out there, flies are probably bad, yes. Here, no. Yeah, the flies are probably getting singed. Extra protein, then, my dad used to say.
Or nerves.
For sure.
If you do anything, you do the heights. Because the priest gets to keep it.
Ah, yes. So the hide of even the whole burnt offering, the priest was able to keep. So Ask the next part of the question. Assuming you got
What do
it.
they do?
What do you do? What do you do with the hide?
They sold it.
You either sold it, you make leather, or
To preserve it.
you then salt it, they turn it and make leather out of it. And then anything that you can make leather out of, they would make from the hides. So while you may not want to be the guy who's always on whole birds offering duty, if you know that the whole birds offering that day is a cow, maybe you want to be on it because that's a pretty big hide that now you get to go and use for your families. A new suit. A new suit. What else? Any other thoughts or questions from this section?
Says, can be baked in oven, prepared in a pan, or cooked on a grill, belongs to the priest who presents it.
So when they bring their food offering, the grain offering, with whatever other offering, whether it's a sin offering, the guilt offering, if it's pre-baked, so it's a cake, it's a bread loaf, or it's a cracker, that is given to the priest who's served. If it's uncooked flour, that is shared with all of the Levites. So in theory, it kind of does function a little bit like the hibachi grill. The chef that's coming, he does the work, he gets paid for that section, and then he goes and takes a break, well, the next piece comes on. So you get paid for what you do, in essence. Now, my thought on that is it should probably be a pure rotation, and you go, it's like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth guy's got the cow. I'm going to make sure that I'm fifth in line because I want beef. I'm tired of mutton. My assumption is it would work.
Isn't that kind of what Eli's sons were doing?
Yes, Eli's sons, who God says are evil, they were going in and taking a portion before it was done cooking, and they were choosing what portion they wanted. They were not doing it this way. Absolutely. Good catch. I forgot about that. They were being greedy. They'd be like, where? Anything else you notice in this? Any other thoughts or questions? Didn't know we were going to get into food service, did you? No.
See, if you kind of find it, you count it up. This guy's got a big cow, and then he gets carried away with his own.
Which, you know, I'm certain that if you tried to escape the line and be where you thought was a good thing, God would make it right. No, sorry. That's not a whole burnt offering like you thought. He's just wealthy. This is a peace offering. Everybody else gets to eat. You just get your little thing. Maybe God is not as facetious as I like to think. You know, maybe I'm making God in my image and not me so much of God's image. But I also don't, as I read this, I see a God who's very clearly saying this is not really about the sacrifice. Yes, I want you to understand that when you sin, there's a cost to it. When you do something wrong, it doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone else. And in order to make that right, something has to pay the price, and it is wrong. There's that sense in which just killing anything is just wrong. And yet, out of that wrong, God says, I'm going to bring a whole lot of good out, which is exactly what we believe happens with Easter. Okay.
So do you think it was a special place in heaven for all these sacrifice animals?
So, okay, final thought.
You asked.
Yes, I do. I do not believe in the whole rainbow bridge. I'm just gonna say that, I think that's cheesy, it's made up, there's no precedent. But, you don't know what rainbow bridge is?
When an animal.
When a pet dies, they get to cross the rainbow bridge and they go in. So it's a kid, isn't it? I don't know where it stems from. But scripture is very clear that all of creation is waiting for the redemption that comes with Christ. And all of creation is redeemed in the act of Christ. And so if all of creation is redeemed, then it's not far-fetched to what you say, if all these animals should be offered a sacrifice. It's very feasible that in the age to come that they would be there. Because all of creation is redeemed, all of it. What that looks like, I don't know, because that's a lot of overpopulated. But now there's the zoologist and he likes that. All those extinct animals, we'll get to see what they actually. Yeah, okay, scientists, you're totally wrong. T-Rex is nothing like that. Apparently you had all that. But
Yeah, I know where
so I can't say definitively to your answer that question, but I think that there is a reality that says because Scripture does claim all of creation is redeemed, I think that one day probably our pets will be. It's not the rainbow bridge kind of thing, but because God means that. How that exactly works, I'll be perfectly honest. I mean, if every single human being that has ever been born is all of a sudden all there, the world's definitely a little overpopulated at that. And yet, in the book of Revelation, it paints this picture that everyone's there, and every knee bows and every tongue confesses. And God can figure it out. I don't remember the whole point of it, but it makes me think of the stupid theological question that always gets brought up in philosophy of religion class in seminary of how many angels can dance on the head of her head? Well, angels don't have bodies like we do, so there's no way to answer. But apparently theologians try to come up with this. Did one of your professors ever try to answer that question? So the reality is the world that we will be reborn into will be both this world and not this world. There'll be a redeemed and glorified version of us. And what that looks like and how it works, I don't know. What animals are there, I assume all of creation is redeemed. That's all I can lay my hand on. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, just not guaranteed. So with that, speculating what happened, let's come back and let's. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time. Lord, the reality of our sinfulness does really hurt. And Lord, we acknowledge that it brings death. And for us as Christians, that death was glorified. And we are grateful that you have paid that price. Lord, we're also grateful that when a price must be paid, you'll make the absolute most good out of it that is possible. So Lord, even as we see these offerings where it feels like an evil act is done in the killing of an animal, Lord, you bring so much redemptive good out. So Lord, I invite you to bring so much redemptive good out of us, that as we bring ourselves as a sacrifice, as we lay ourselves at your feet, we give our lives to you. Lord, that you would multiply that holiness within us. And Lord, that we would be a light into the darkness, and we would be your priests to this world. I pray this in your name, for your glory. Amen. So,